back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at U.S.-China relations.
Always a fun one.
Yeah, always interesting and sometimes a little bit frustrating.
Right.
We're focusing on a specific event here.
Okay.
China's decision to send their Vice President Han Zheng to Trump's inauguration back in 2017.
2017.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, a foreign leader shows up at an inauguration, no big deal.
Right.
But this was actually the first time that a top Chinese leader had attended a new U.S. president's swearing-in ceremony.
Wow.
Yeah, so our mission today is to kind of unpack what this move really meant, what it tells us about the state of U.S.-China relations at the time, and how it fits into the bigger picture.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that it's not just a, polite formality.
Right.
Heads of state don't usually go to these things. It's typically, lower-ranking officials. So China sending the VP was definitely a signal.
Yeah.
It's also interesting to note that the Trump transition team actually invited Xi Jinping himself,
Oh.
which was also out of the ordinary.
Okay, so it seems like both sides were signaling an interest in at least connecting.
Yeah.
But, I mean, things between the U.S. and China back then weren't exactly, sunshine and roses.
No.
Were there any specific goals that China might have had in mind with this visit?
Yeah, I mean, it's likely they had a couple of things they wanted to accomplish. Remember, leading up to Trump's inauguration, U.S.-China relations were already pretty turbulent.
Yeah.
Disputes over technology, trade practices, human rights, and obviously Taiwan.
Right.
All creating points of friction. So by sending Han Zheng China could demonstrate a willingness to engage with the new administration, potentially, set a more positive tone for future interactions.
So it's like they were trying to open a door for communication despite all those disagreements.
Exactly. And you also have to keep in mind the global landscape. At the time, China's economic influence was growing rapidly.
Of course.
And they were looking to assert themselves on the world stage.
Yeah.
This visit to the U.S. inauguration could be seen as a way for China to signal its arrival. Emphasize its desire for a more prominent role in shaping the global order.
So it sounds like a pretty calculated move, trying to project strength while also extending an olive branch.
Right.
But didn't the U.S. also have its own set of concerns about China's rise?
Oh, absolutely. There was growing anxiety in the U.S. about China's economic and military ambition. They saw it as a potential challenge to American dominance. And the U.S. was also wary of China's human rights record and its increasingly assertive stance in the South China Sea.
So even with this attempt at a fresh start, there was already this underlying tension, almost like a game of chess where each side is trying to anticipate the other's next move.
That's a great analogy, and this visit really highlights that complexity. You have this public display of engagement and diplomacy happening on one level, while underneath it all, there's this undercurrent of competition and suspicion.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to end this first part on.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it really does feel like that sometimes, doesn't it?
It does.
Well, let's zoom in on one area in particular that was a major source of tension at the time: trade. This was front and center during Trump's campaign and his entire presidency, right?
Absolutely. Trade was kind of a key battleground in the U.S.-China relationship. Trump had campaigned on the promise of being tough on China, accusing them of, unfair trade practices and vowing to bring manufacturing jobs back to the U.S.
Yeah, didn't he threaten to slap even higher tariffs on Chinese goods?
Yeah, he did.
I remember those headlines, causing a lot of anxiety in the markets.
Oh, yeah. And he followed through on those threats, igniting what became known as the trade war.
Right.
Both sides imposing tit-for-tat tariffs on billions of dollars worth of goods, creating uncertainty, disrupting global supply chains.
Yeah, it was a mess.
It was,
Yeah.
and remember, this wasn't just about economics, it was about leverage. Each side trying to, exert its influence and gain an advantage.
So knowing all that, how do you think the Chinese viewed this whole trade war situation? Was it seen as a genuine economic threat or more like a negotiating tactic from Trump?
I mean, it's likely they saw it as a bit of both. China's leaders are pretty pragmatic. They understand how interconnected the global economy is. A full-blown trade war with the U.S. would hurt both sides. But they also recognized that, Trump's approach was, shall we say, unconventional.
Right.
There was a degree of unpredictability there that definitely made them cautious.
It's fascinating how much psychology plays into all of this. It's almost like a high-stakes poker game with each side trying to read the other's bluff.
It really is. And in this context, China sending Han Zheng to the inauguration takes on even more strategic dimension.
Yeah.
It was a way for them to signal that despite all the trade war rhetoric, they were still open to dialogue, still interested in finding common ground.
It's like they were saying, look, we're willing to play ball, but let's not lose sight of the bigger picture here.
Exactly. They were trying to maintain some degree of stability in the relationship, even as tensions were escalating in other areas.
Right.
But then, of course, you had the added layer of Trump's personality, which always made things a bit more unpredictable.
Oh, yeah. Let's not forget about that factor.
Yeah.
Speaking of unpredictable, there's that seemingly random detail about TikTok and its CEO, Shouzi Chu, being at the inauguration. This was right when the app was facing a potential ban in the U.S., wasn't it?
Yeah, and it might seem unrelated at first glance, but it actually ties in perfectly with what we're talking about.
Yep.
Trump had initially supported a law forcing TikTok's Chinese parent company to sell off its U.S. operations.
Right, because of the whole national security concern.
Yeah, exactly. He was arguing that the app could be used to, collect data on American citizens.
But then he suddenly backtracked on the ban.
He did. It was a complete reversal, and it kind of left everyone scratching their heads.
Yeah, I remember that.
This whole episode with TikTok really encapsulates the unpredictable nature of U.S.-China relations under the Trump administration. It's a reminder that even at a seemingly celebratory event like an inauguration, these underlying tensions and power dynamics are always at play.
Yeah, it really is wild when you think about it. This one event, Han Zheng at the inauguration,
Yeah.
it just opens up all these questions about the U.S.-China relationship.
Right. It's like we've got this, this public gesture of goodwill, and
Yeah.
then behind the scenes, there's this whole economic battle going on, and then you've got the tech clash looming with the TikTok thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So much going on.
Yeah.
What do you think, for someone trying to make sense of all of this, what's the key takeaway here?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember is that U.S.-China relations, they're rarely black and white.
Yeah.
It's always this back and forth, cooperation and competition, shared interests, but then conflicting priorities. This event really shows that, China was obviously trying to build some kind of bridge with the new administration, but they were also coming from a position of strength.
Right.
And with their own goals in mind.
So it's not just about whether the U.S. and China, get along or not.
Right.
It's more about understanding that this whole relationship is constantly changing.
Yeah.
And each side is making moves, trying to get what they want.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And those interests don't always, line up.
Yeah.
The U.S. wants to stay on top globally, and China wants to expand their influence and change the existing order. So there's always going to be tension there.
Makes sense no matter who's in charge.
Exactly.
It really makes you realize that we can't look at these things just on their own Han Zheng's visit.
Yeah.
It was just one piece of a much bigger puzzle.
It was. And it's a puzzle that's, still being put together.
Right.
All those things, we talked about the trade stuff, the tech competition, the geopolitical maneuvering, it's all still happening today, maybe even more so.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm kind of left thinking about how important it is to understand all of this.
Yeah.
All the things that are happening behind the scenes shaping this relationship.
Right. It's not about, predicting the future, but about seeing the long game that's being played.
I totally agree. And, for anyone listening, the key takeaway is stay informed. Look beyond the headlines. Think about the history and the motivations, the strategy behind everything. That's how you start to really get this relationship.
This complex, constantly evolving relationship that's going to keep shaping the 21st century.
Well said. And that's what the deep dive is all about. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive into a topic that matters.